Hello there, and welcome to the very first proper episode of Delightful Dissent. You might have called me yesterday when I did episode 0, but this is the first proper one. And today I'm going to be talking to Rowena Gerrett on the assumption, or exploring the assumption, that nature is a luxury. So this series is all about challenging assumptions, and particularly the assumptions that hold us back, individually or collectively. It's looking at the way that we think and the things that we believe and seeing if we can really work with that and improve that, but doing so in a positive way. That's the delightful part of it. It's not about proving someone's right, and it's not about proving that you're wrong. It's really about exploring how we can do things better, more joyfully, and open up possibility for ourselves and for other people. And the other side of this is, first of all, I want to give a showcase to people who are doing this work and who are doing really wonderful work. But equally, I want to provide a model, an experience for everyone to see how other people do this work so that they can do more of it themselves as well. Because for me, this assumption challenging work, pushing these edges a bit and understanding this is a really important part of everything that we do for everyone. And I want to give you some helpful tips, and you'll learn some interesting things and learn some new things. But equally, I want to give you the experience of what it is to engage with this stuff and challenge this stuff yourself. And so that means really engaging with us. Please do comment as the episode goes on. If you comment live on YouTube, we'll answer any questions that come up at the end, or share comments afterwards and get in touch with us, and I'll share details about how to do that at the very end. But yeah, please do engage as you see fit, and I hope you enjoy this episode. So yeah, today I'm talking to Rowena Gerrett, and I first met her, I think it was a year or two ago at the Good Business Club, which is a really interesting group as well. And we're going to be speaking to someone from the Good Business Club in a few weeks' time. So we just had a really interesting, fascinating conversation, and kind of very different paths to coming to some quite similar things to explore, and that's always really exciting for me. So I really wanted to get Rowena on here as a very early guest, and I'm very grateful to her for being courageous enough to be kind of the very first guest, because that's always something slightly different. And obviously, we're in a slightly strange context in general as we're recording. There's an awful lot of unknowns going on in the world. So it's a very interesting place to be, stepping out into further unknown in a way. But I think that's a really healthy thing and a really important thing. And then this is exactly the kind of thing that I'm interested in exploring, and in a different way, hopefully we're gonna get into today. So what I'd like to do is ask you really, to describe your work a little bit in your own words, please, and tell me, what you do and who you work with as well.
Thank you. Well, I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you. And after our preliminary conversation about this, I think I said to you, I never come out of a conversation with you without something to think about, like really genuinely. So I'm really excited about this today. So thank you for asking me. As you said, I'm Rowena Gerrett, and I run Rowan Tree. That's my organisation, my business, I should say, and it's evolved over the last couple of years, especially, to really be a synthesis of a number of approaches. So I'm a facilitator and a coach, and at the absolute core of it, it's about bringing people from a place of uncertainty, of disconnect, of mistrust of self, of disconnect with self, into a place of spaciousness, of calm, and feeling that they have the tools and the confidence, the resilience to really listen to themselves, to what they need, and then practical steps to take that forwards. So I do primarily work with people who identify as female, not exclusively. And a lot of my work, as we're going to see today, is through the lens of connection with nature. I believe really strongly in the importance of all of our intelligences or all of our needs being greeted. So thinking about our physical, our working in an embodied way, so our physical needs, our emotional, and our spiritual, whatever that is, to each individual person, as well as the one that society tends to place right up at the pinnacle, which is, our academic or our cognitive functioning. So I do work in a very embodied way, working absolutely through connection with nature, and I know we'll explore more around that. And just to say really that what a fascinating time. I feel really privileged to be doing this work at the moment, with everything that the last couple of years and this last year especially has brought. And as we'll discuss, I think some new, or I should say renewed connections and identifications that people have made with our natural world, particularly in this last year. So yes, I look forward to to exploring that.
Lovely stuff. Thank you very much. And is there a quote for you that kind of captures some aspect of this, that sums up some part of this for you?
Yeah, we also said, didn't we? I have about 1,000 quotes that I love.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's
and so being me, I'm actually going to be cheeky and I'm going to take two. They're short. They're both short. So one of them comes from the Cuban-American writer, so Agnes Nin, and she says, "The day came when the risk it took to remain tight in the bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom." And I guess for me that kind of it brings together a lot of what I do, of what I within myself, within my work, and through connection with other people like yourself. I like we learn so much through the metaphor of nature, and we'll explore that. And also this idea that stepping forwards isn't easy necessarily, and it can be painful, but actually to stay in a place of stuckness, of frustration, can actually be more difficult. And so finding those pathways and being supported in finding those pathways forwards is the way that we step into ourselves, that we blossom. As we'll talk about, I think it's not always about do. We'll talk about that, and yet it's about that absolute core, being true to yourself, and knowing what that is and trusting it.
And discovering that, I think, as well. That's one of the big challenges, isn't it? We're not brought up to do that necessarily. Not expected to. It's not something that's given to us. Maybe it's something that can't fully be given to us, but it's something that is a discovery process, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we want to continue this metaphor, as you say, we sometimes need to seek because of our societal expectations, our experiences, our familial experiences, everything. We will sometimes need to seek how to fertilize the soil around us, how to water, how to nurture, and then how to step out, how to blossom, and to do so in a way with kindness, and without judgment, which is what happens in the natural world, of course. And if I may, I'm going to speak to my second quote.
Yeah, please do.
Just very quickly, which is John Muir, who if I'm sure a lot of people will be aware, is a pioneer of the national parks, and of so much of the work that is done in the 20th and 21st century in terms of engagement and conservation work. And that is simply into the woods I go to lose my mind and find my soul. And that'll resonate in a different way with different people, but I think, gosh, especially at the moment, I think it's about pretending the world isn't there, because we're at a time more than ever that we need people who step forwards, and who step forwards for connectivity and constructive work. And we also want to connect with all those parts of ourselves, not just this.
Absolutely. No, that's great, thank you. So the assumption that we're we're working with is that nature is a luxury. And I wanted to just explore a little bit with you about, what is it that made you want to choose this particular topic, this particular assumption? What is it that you really want to, why is it that you felt it was important to challenge this today?
Thank you. I really like the way that we framed this, in a conversation that we had before. And, I think the fact that there are a number of ways that we can approach this assumption. The first one, perhaps the more obvious, is the idea that just, going out and being in nature is a luxury. And sort of that idea of, well, it's something that's nice, and it's something that, and actually, as we delve into this, there's so much, if we need it, scientific evidence now of the positive effects that it has, on our minds, on our nervous systems, and actually so much that we can learn from it, from nature, in terms of the way of the symbiotic way of working that I would argue we really do need in our society at the moment. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I am an ecologist or, environmental expert, or indeed an expert in loads of these things, lots of these things. And actually what I do, apart from anything else, is speak from experience, as well as then further learning and study. And, I think as well, it talks to, as another level that we can go to is nature, as in our inherent natures, our absolute natures. And I really like the fact that this assumption that we're going to work with allows us to start really questioning that, and this idea that we should be this and we should be that, and this is what things should look like and this is what we should do. And we are at a point where a lot of people are feeling a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, and also a lot of opportunities are being taken away from people, and it can be and will be feeling for a lot of people a time that things are closing, and what we actually need is a time where we are opening up our viewpoint, and we are bringing back into conversation more nuance, and just simply more conversation, and I think the most powerful way that we do that is by knowing ourselves and being true to ourselves, and being authentic as well as empathetic, in the conversations that we have. So yeah, there's a lot of different layers to it, and
there's so many things I kind of want to follow up on, and threads I really want to follow in that. I think it's such a rich area to explore, which is absolutely perfect, and perhaps a apt metaphor as well. But for me, I think there's something really interesting in there around that relationship between knowing ourselves and knowing the world, and I've often kind of worked under the assumption that they were separate things. You learn about yourself and you learn about the world, but what I'm coming to the understanding really that they exist in relationship to one another. So how we relate to the world and how we relate to ourselves aren't separate things. They're absolutely functions of each other, and so being able to explore what that is, what both sides of that are in this new context is really powerful.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And we talk about what we consume, in terms of be careful of, be aware of what you consume. And we often think about that in terms of, purely our food, our fuel, and yet actually our consumption is many different things, isn't it? And that includes, the people who are around us, and the world that is around us, in terms of the type of environment that we are in. And the sort of opportunities for learning that we just choose to place ourselves in. So I would absolutely agree with that. To bring those two to understand them as inextricably linked is fundamental. Absolutely.
And it's really interesting, and that idea of being mindful, being intentional about the experiences that we have and the context in which those experiences occur is not something I've particularly thought of for most of my life. And what's interesting is that I'm aware of quite a lot of neuroscience behind this that really suggests that it very strongly influences how we feel, and how we think is actually influenced by our context in really subtle, profound ways. It's not that we are kind of separately, our mind, our conceptual self doesn't really sit fully separately from our embodied self and the environment that embodied self finds itself in. So there's something, by shifting where we are, we can think in a different way. And nature has a profound capability of doing that, partly because we spend so long in the built environment, in the man-made environment, with all of its mechanical things and its straight lines and rectilinear shapes, and that puts us in a certain mode of thinking. And being amongst living things and curves and kind of patterns, like deep patterns, puts us in a different mode of thinking and opens up different opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking to that, there's a lot of, it's something that's inherent in us, but I think there's a lot of very interesting research on that being written about at the moment. If you take someone like Lucy Jones, who wrote Losing Eden, Why Our Minds Need the Wild, or Williamson, who wrote The Nature Fix, that both really good syntheses of this kind of research. Absolutely, in terms of as you said, the patterns that exist within nature, and the way that our brains are working in entirely different ways to, a much more open ways. And even, decades ago, you had researchers, Kaplan, who were talking about this idea of attention restoration therapy, that the impacts that having time out in nature has upon our minds and upon our nervous systems, and the opportunity not just for restoration, but also for reflection, that it creates that openness. And I think it's really interesting to work with the landscape, as well. And one of the things I talk to people about is the way that we can, work with that to sort of turn perhaps rumination into sort of constructive inquiry, for example. And just one example of that would be if we are wanting to sort of open up the way that we're thinking, our views, apart from sort of the embodiment of it, and we can talk to that as well, the physically sort of shifting the way we're holding our body. If we go somewhere like to be by the sea, so we have this open horizon, the big wide space, and the impact that has on us, and within that as well, this idea that Kaplan talks about of what they call soft fascination. So this idea that, in the modern day, and they were writing, several decades ago. So if we think about where we are now, that we are bombarding our brains with technologies and input that they're just not evolved to handle. And nature offering us these opportunities to be fascinated, to be held, to slow the chatter, and yet to do so softly. So a lovely example of that would be a sunset. You're held by it, your mind, and yet it's in a way that is gentle and is appropriate, for the way that we've evolved. And this is really powerful stuff. It's not optional, really, for wellness. It's not optional to have this in our lives. It is proven. And not just to support people on a everyday basis, or people who are broadly kind of functioning, in the sort of main, but actually really strong evidence to support people who are experiencing much more severe mental health problems, for example, mental health experiences and conditions, that there are profound effects that it can have for people in that kind of space as well, which is really interesting.
I think it's, again, there's so many pathways I'd like to follow up on that one, but that idea of really giving space to start to explore in a different way, and deal with the rumination, deal with the loops, the kind of stuckness, and that's a really important thing for everyone. It's a when those loops become disabling, it's what we call mental health, many of the mental health issues, but those aren't kind of just thinking loops, they're embodied loops. So we're feeling and thinking things that we can't resolve in our current context in some way, and so we need to shift that context, so shift the external context so we can shift our internal context as well. And that again, that relationship, there's something very powerful there. There's also something, speaking of power, around really when we do open things up like this, and this gets to the heart of why I'm doing partly what I'm doing, is we do challenge things. These kind of insights and this kind of openness brings new possibilities in, and those may not be possibilities that are officially sanctioned yet, even if they're good possibilities. And so I think there's something really interesting in there around that relationship to these experiences, our ability to create positive change, but equally our ability to therefore challenge authority as well.
Absolutely. And in order to step out, and in order to step out in ways that we want to in the world, and that we know that we feel called to, it is important to have a couple of things, to have points of restoration, to have points of security and of movement that supports us, and also, as you say, so many of the rules. This has been a big learning for me in the last couple of years. Actually, there are a lot of rules in nature. They exist. They really do. But actually, the rules around us, the societal rules that we mostly adhere to, and have been brought up to think are absolute. They are absolute truths. They're only there because somebody made them up, and then somebody backed up that person, and then either nobody questioned it or haven't questioned it enough that that they have that they've changed, and yeah, absolutely. I think one of the really interesting things that we're seeing at the moment, and we need to hear more of the voices amplified, within lots of different conversations, is the way that communities and nations who have respect and listen to different people within their communities are far more likely to be caring for the natural world, and to be caring for everyone within their communities. So an example, if we look at a lot of some indigenous population, peoples who have that societal setup where women are more listened to. We could talk about ecofeminism. We could go down that way, but that actually a society that is sort of more patriarchal, we know, is less likely to care for the world around it. One that that supports and listens to and honours the knowledge and the wisdom from everybody within their society is far more likely to live in a harmonious way, and in a way that is harmonious with the world around it. And there is some phenomenal activism going on at the moment. I can't pretend to be really knowledgeable about that isn't my field of expertise, but we do know that there is some incredible stuff going on, and a lot of that is being led by the voices of people who, particularly in the last number of decades, have been have sought to be quietened, women, for example, and and people of colour. It's fascinating.
There's something really interesting in there for me. First of all, around the positive benefit of integrating a diversity of perspectives, and that's also one of the big themes of my work as well.
I just rambled on there, Matthew. Thank you.
That first of all, it's in the interest of the people that are integrated. It's obviously people aren't oppressed anymore, and that's nice for them, and that's an important thing to do for our overall sense of justice. But in terms of a self-interested act, I think it's also very interesting because one of the things I'm very keen on is making sure that we're always working at the intersection of our needs and other people's needs, and rather than seeking to make change that's a trade-off, where we're taking something from someone and giving it to someone else, because ultimately, we're seeking to make things better for everyone. And where there is an existing authority and it has power, it's not going to cede that power if it's not in its interest to do so. And I think really highlighting the importance of increasing opportunity and increasing resilience, and those two things very much go hand in hand for me, that when we introduce a diversity of perspectives, we can engage more effectively with that uncertainty. We've got more approaches we can use. And obviously we are reliant on the natural world. We are part of nature. I think there's one of the interesting separations that's evolved is us thinking of ourselves as separate from nature, when we are nature expressing itself. We might be doing stuff as well, but that doesn't mean we're not natural on that level. And I think there's something really interesting, and that when we think of ourselves as separate from it, we think of the natural world as something to kind of engineer and control, instead of something to create a mutually beneficial relationship with. And the more diverse perspectives we have, the greater our opportunity to create that mutually beneficial relationship. So for the people right in the middle of the system, whose interests are aligned with the continuation of the system, the more sustainable it is, the better their interests are served. And I think this is a really interesting point, and one, to some degree for us to know and to hold, perhaps, and to make occasionally. It is a reason for us to do this work. It's not working in spite of the existing authority. We're actually supporting them and supporting their change, even if that's not something that they particularly want, because they feel compelled to act in a certain different way.
There was so much in there, and I'm thinking where I want to begin in terms of response, but this idea of of separation, and of us being, I think, not only separate to, but better than, higher than, it really is perpetuated in a lot of our in a lot of our narratives. And for all the benefits that came with these things, both the Enlightenment and then the Industrial Revolution have a lot to answer for in terms of this, this sphere that we're, this field that we're talking about here. And I think in terms of access to, and this, I know this is something that we, that we sort of touched upon in a previous conversation, in terms of access to nature. In a physical way, actually being really, arguably, very tied up in a much wider idea of access to freedom, of access to self, of access to self-determination, and self-efficacy, and we live in a society where there are very sort of tight boundaries, and a lot of those boundaries have gates on them that say keep out, but this idea that we are of the land, and that we are part of it. And I think that there was conversation, for example, during the first lockdown, where we saw people going out into nature and leaving quite a lot of mess, where we saw people who were, I live in Brighton down the south coast, and saw people coming down to the beach and there being enormous amounts of mess left. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't not upset about that. I absolutely was. And yet the narrative there was really interesting in the way, the terms that it was couched, in terms of shouldn't be here, and they shouldn't be doing this, and this is outrageous, and this is disgusting. And, as I think it's David Attenborough who said, people won't look after something that they don't love. You have to teach people to know something, to love it, and then they look after it. I would argue that that's the same for us, actually.
Absolutely.
Ourselves. But there is that argument that, that it's terrible how people practice. It comes from a place of privilege, and actually it was mostly being argued by people who spent most of lockdown in their gardens, which is a privilege. If you're on the 14th floor of a block of flats in an inner city, you go to the beach, then it's a very different experience. So I suppose what I'm saying here is that over centuries actually, we have had access to land and access to nature and access to that connection eroded, that does that, especially in this country, in the UK, that is a really important part of this this conversation, and how we begin to shift that is a big topic and a really, really important one.
I think there's something really interesting in there for me around the assumption that really access is about the right to exploit. It's about the right to exploit it. And when I say exploit, I mean to use it for one's own ends and deplete it. And I think that's true of littering and kind of leaving a space. But it's fundamentally the model that we're following for most landowning in this country. So it's not unreasonable for people who don't have who don't have the space themselves to treat the public space in that way, because that's the model set for them by everyone else as well. It's just expressed in a different way. Yeah. I think that idea, the fundamental idea that we're controlling access, and it's about who can exploit that space rather than who can enjoy that space and gain benefit from it, of course, and practical benefit from it, of course, but do so in a way that opens up opportunity for them and other people to enjoy it further, is a very, very different thing.
Well, and arguably even just to be, just to be with the land and to be on it, like even, not necessarily to even need to couch it in a particular term of, a more positive, active, more positive verb, actually, just to be, it is just an absolute fundamental right in my opinion. And this disconnect, we know, is damaging. And, we know that the more that we can do to support people in creating access, the better for our health, for our mental health, for our physical health. And I think it's really interesting how I think at the moment, it does feel like this year there have been some experiences, this is a hopeful, that there have been some experiences by a number of, on the part of a number of people individually, particularly during that first lockdown, that has opened eyes up again, to this importance, the experiences that people are having. And there are some bridges that are being built. There are bridges that are being built between sort of different communities and different modes of operating. So, we need to build bridges between, for example, the corporation that has 2,000 people working for them and the person who works on, a project where people go and have amazing ecotherapeutic experiences, and to see them as being able and support them in having constructive conversations and on very practical levels, sort of supporting things in being set up that people will benefit from it. And I think that the conversation around that is growing. I really do. And I think that if we're going to take positives from this year, then that can be one of them. What we choose to do with it and the momentum that we choose to build around it. And I say that as myself as like a tiny little part of that, but ripple effect. I think it's quite exciting and quite interesting. I think there are some shifts being made.
I think that relationship between being and doing is a really, really important one, and an underexplored one for me. I think we get very focused on doing and feel very busy in the sense that we have a big list of things that we must do, that we feel compelled to do and feel the pull of that, and we want to be busy all the time, and we want to see other people busy all the time. I think for me, one of the interesting experiences of the last few months is obviously realizing I do value outdoors time and need to spend time outdoors. I'm primarily working from home at the moment. And so actually just going out for a walk, and that feels oddly transgressive. The act of simply going out, walking around the park for no other reason than the enjoyment of the natural space, that feels like something I'm not entirely allowed to do. And I know some of that is internal, but I got that, I picked that up from somewhere. That is an assumption out there as well. And so I think there's, when going for a walk itself is a rebellious act, it's a very interesting place to be.
Yeah, isn't it? And, I'm not sure that we do want to be busy all the time.
I don't think it's healthy. I think it's compulsive.
Yeah, it is compulsive. And I think it comes to that I should be busy. I should be doing it, in the post-industrial, culture that we live in, that absolutely that our worth remains predicated upon our productivity, and and the various ways in which we measure that, and to speak to my own experience on this, I absolutely am and we all are a product of that, of our cultures and our our experiences. I know that as a high achieving, an academically high achieving good girl, and a all the way through, and a should and a this and a should, as my friend calls it, shoulding all over ourselves, and and absolutely it does feel transgressive to just be. And that is, I think, as you say, one of the powerful things about nature, is the modeling that provides for us of that, and this idea that that's not nothing, that actually it's fundamental to connecting to ourselves, fundamental to just opening up the space to be more receptive to the ideas and the thoughts around us, and I think it's about permission, isn't it? It's about giving ultimately us needing to give ourselves permission to slow and simply to be, and whatever that might hold. And these aren't new ideas. We talked about going for a walk, and funnily enough, so this morning, I'd had a look over. I had a look over the notes again that you sent through, and I was having to think about this. And then I put my shoes on because I need to take my dog for a walk. And there was this little, well, why are you going out? And it's 8:30. You should be doing this, and you should be sat at a desk already. Bear in mind, I was a secondary school teacher for years, and so by 8:30, I was well into my day. And I've worn a few hats. And why should? And I was like, well, how about I take these ideas with me, and as I'm walking outside, I let them be and I let them flow. This isn't new. Wordsworth did it. So many people did it in terms of creativity, and that movement enabling creativity to flow. And yet there was still that voice of, well, you're not actually really doing anything, are you? That's not actually, is that productive? How dare you kind of be out, at that time when you should be at your desk. And giving ourselves permission to do that, and therefore permission for others to do that, is the time, I think, to really be breaking those ways of working and ways of being open.
I think for me, there's a really big difference between being what we call productive in the sense of producing and being effective. And in a way, we actually want to be effective with minimal production. We want to spend the minimum effort to achieve anything, which is about efficiency. But the other side of that is about choosing the right thing to do in the first place. And that's not something that we think about so often. And I think that may be one of the fundamentally challenging things to authority, is authority tells us what the right thing to do is. That's kind of its role. It's kind of its job in a sense. And if we start to push the edges of that, it challenges that authority. And so there's something, really interesting in there, in that space of really getting into this space of, there are easier ways to do this. We can find more ease. We can find more ease with ourselves and in what we do as well. And that has whilst it doesn't have a direct effect on the kind of outcomes, it has a big influence on whether those outcomes are actually going to result in something valuable to us and to other people. And so I think, in a sense, there's a degree of avoidance, almost, of challenging the difficult things that do come up when you do this work, that we're not doing, and accepting that is hard, really hard, perhaps for most people, probably harder than just carrying on being busy.
Absolutely.
Very much like the quote you said, actually, exactly at the beginning, that we can carry on being kind of tightly bound and not changing, not growing. And that is, in a sense, it's comfortable, it's easier, but in the long run it becomes very, very difficult, increasingly difficult to get out of. And I think that's the big challenge for us, is where we're seeing this for ourselves and for other people, and working on these barriers, working on that for ourselves and for other people at the same time.
Absolutely. And I think there is ebb and flow within ourselves, and within everything. There is ebb and flow. There is give and take, and within the natural world, what we see is shift, is movement of energy and types of energy over time. And I think that there are some really incredible things that we can learn from that, if we choose to. And if we talk about sort of shifts in energy, we can look, for example, in seasonal energy. And I speak to this because I say, actually, again, still the capitalist sort of post-industrial society that we work in is that we should have the same output all the time, each day, every day, in this way, and we don't work like that. We're animals, and we don't work like that. And if we look seasonally, we're well into autumn, we're coming into winter. This is a time not for that open, outward, high energy of summer. It's a time for closing, for slowing. It's a time for nourishment. And as we come into winter, it's a real time to come into self, and to come into meeting the dark as well as the light. And when we push through that, that there are going to be consequences. There's consequences for our health, consequences for the health of the people around us, and this reluctance or denial of these shifts is really, really damaging. And I think most people will feel that they're wrong. They're wrong if they can't keep up, and they're wrong if they can't be sort of working in that automatronic way. And actually, the more that we can listen to our bodies and see that as us as part of a bigger whole, and understand our place within it, the more ease and the more kindness we can have. That doesn't mean that we're not going to create. Actually, we might create more, but create differently, and create with flow. I work a lot with women, and we can talk to internal cycles. It's massively important. I'm so happy that we're talking now in my spring of my cycle, where I want to talk, where I'm open, where and summer collaboration is feeling good. In 2 weeks' time, I would always enjoy a conversation with you, but I would be enjoying it and be far less energetic and far more wanting to connect and give that energy. And the reality is that a large proportion of our population is experiencing those kind of ebbs and flows throughout a big chunk of their lives. And the more that we can connect and understand that, and allow it, the better.
There's something really important, and I would say, actually, I suspect all of our population is experiencing some form of ebb and flow. It isn't necessarily as predictable, but there is always that for everyone, and being able to, it's just for most of us, we're not taught to be aware of it. We're not expected to be aware of it. In fact, as you said, we're expected to ignore it and push on. And that doesn't help. And it partly doesn't help for exactly the thing you were mentioning around, the cycles, and this natural cycle is, each aspect of the cycle is what it is, and it has inherent value. It does something just by its nature because of what it is. And I think when we decide that there is only one way to work on this, there is only one way to engage with this, that it has to be a certain way, we kind of prejudge an outcome, prejudge how we relate to something, then we constrict the kind of value that we can do, and we can only work in one part of the cycle. And I think it's really important that, when we're doing this, we want to see the whole cycle through, and some bits will be better at, some bits will be worse at, some bits will be easier, some bits will need support at. But this kind of constant cycling through of change and of this growing experience is a really important thing. And we can't reach this kind of perfect point in any of our work, really. Ultimately, we're working in a complex adaptive system amongst other complex adaptive systems. It's all about resolution and moving to a new place of greater opportunity and less suffering, rather than it is putting suffering beyond doubt, moving things beyond, where it can never happen again. And I think that kind of regenerative work is really limited by our prejudice, by our, and when I say prejudice, that kind of prejudgment of things is a real barrier to doing that.
Absolutely. And there's a shape, a pattern that occurs time and time again within nature, and that is of the spiral. And I think it's not an accident that it exists within quite a lot of our architecture as well. We're drawn to it, and you talked before about the impact of different geometry and different pattern shapes, and the impact, the way our eyes work. We are evolved to connect with nature in that way. But in terms of the spiral, I think that's it's a very powerful symbol, as well as, a natural shape, in terms of, just as you were speaking to, this idea that firstly, nothing is permanent, and that, that we come around and, we have this idea, there's a little drawing of, everyone thinks success looks like this. No, went off the camera there. Looks like this, and actually it looks like this, and it's kind of a squiggly line. I think actually life looks like this. It's it's that spiral, and there's a necessity to returning time and again to places in order that we can reintegrate, in order that we can reassess, that we can reconnect, and also knowing that we never return to that place in the same way, because we can't. We are different people, molded by our experiences in between, and our connections, and everything that's happened, and by all the shifts that have happened around us. And I think, and knowing that actually also at the moment, I think can provide us with comfort in the time that we need it, and I've talked to this idea quite a bit in recent months, this idea, from the natural world, the fact that, we know winter follows autumn, and autumn follows summer, and I'm in no way denying the pain and the experiences that are being had at the moment. I feel it very, very strongly. And yet also knowing that nothing is permanent. I feel very privileged this year, that two of the lenses that I really look at the world through are, the natural world, and as originally my training as a historian, knowing that even the greatest dynasties or anything, or experiences, everything starts and everything finishes. And that doesn't mean we don't have a role to play in it.
And I think it's a really, influence rather than control, and they're very different, very important, different approaches. And what that really opens up for me is, how we relate this to ourselves and what we do. And I think, coming back to your work really, and how you're applying this for you and for the people around you, I think would be a helpful way to kind of bring this back full circle, perhaps.
Thank you. Yeah. We talked to permission, and we talked to complexity, and as Whitman would say, said we contain multitudes, and we really do. And I think being able to hold all of those multitudes, each of them, and to greet each of them. Another person we could quote, we won't just sit here and reel them off, but Rumi would say, this being human is a guest house, and to welcome each and everything that that comes to us, because it is, to paraphrase, it's teaching us something. And that's not always easy. But yeah, absolutely, to know and to give ourselves permission to touch on each of those things. And so, yeah, I think for myself, the work that I've done and the work that I do, it is about permission. It is about permission to be what we are, to be what we need to be, and also about opening up the conversation so that other people feel able to do that as well, and feel empowered to do that. And while I do believe that people have it within them, I also believe that we need structure sometimes, or a better word would be tools in order to to shape and to shift things. And I believe very powerfully that we do this through connectivity, and we do it through collaboration. People are saying mushrooms are going to save us. And there's a lot of conversation about mushrooms at the moment in certain circles, probably. But actually, there's so this research now in terms of the way that fungi are, the connectivity under the ground, and we can look at it through tree roots, through all sorts of things, but that connection and that willingness to connect and that ebb and flow, that is how we're going to shift and move forward. And occasionally, if I talk to my work, I think occasionally people might think that it's about things being nice. If we come back to our thing, nature's a luxury, it's nice, isn't it? It's not. It's about those real fundamentals, and it's not about escaping the world, and as I said, and pretending that what's going on isn't going on. It's about providing ourselves with resources and models and learnings so that we can step into the world. And the women I work with do phenomenal things, so we can step into the world and play the role that that we want to play, and continue to reassess that and reassess ourselves.
I think that building that connection with self and others, and that being two sides of the same thing. I love the metaphor of the kind of mycorrhizome, of the kind of fungal mat in the forest, as it's what connects the mighty tree to the forest. And I think how valuable that connection is to the tree and to the forest are really, it's such a wonderful metaphor for exactly this. And to deny ourselves and to deny other people that connection feels like it's not only an injustice and an unfairness, but it's a fundamental error of our own interest. We don't help ourselves or other people by disconnecting ourselves or other people from that experience. And I really like the value of your work and using nature to help people reconnect and do this from your perspective. Because I think one of the other big things about this for me is, if we go to that, look at that metaphor of a forest, is each part of the forest does a different thing. It contributes to the overall. And it does it through its own self-expression, through its own being itself. And, it's not about being a specific thing. It's about being the thing that you are,
Mm.
and how that value is expressed.
Mm.
And first of all, in terms of modeling that, nature is wonderful and a metaphor, but it's also an incredible place to figure that out for yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, were you gonna? Yeah, no, absolutely. I smiled because it was exactly what I thought to speak to. And have you ever gone into a forest or into woodland and thought, well, that tree's too small, or that tree's too skinny, or what's that tree doing with those branches up there, or of that colour, And there was a woman on one of my workshops at the weekend, and it was a creative activity, and one of the things she did was she gathered a few things just that had fallen, in a respectful way, to the land around us. And some were really brightly coloured, and others were these little sticks, and others were, and exactly speaking to that. And that felt incredibly powerful for her. She's working in the NHS at the moment, and a sense that whatever shape, whatever we look like, whatever we're doing, we are all contributing and are of value. And I think to take that tree, that metaphor just a little bit further, we talked about the groundedness, and that being through connectivity, through very regular practice, grounding practices. And we've got our topic here today, but we could also absolutely speak to the very embodied practices that support us in doing that groundedness and that rootedness. Because what that also enables is the trunk, and then the movement, and God, has there ever been a year where we've needed to be more flexible and been, needed to move with the winds, with the storms that are battering us? And, the way that we do that, and we do often need support in developing this, absolutely, is to have that flexibility, that ability and willingness to shift and move. And that is supported by that groundedness. You can shift, but without falling over.
That's wonderful. So if someone does, someone watching does want to build that and is interested in exploring that with you in some way, what are the best ways for them to be able to do that?
Why, thank you for asking, Matthew. How generous of you. Yeah, look, there are a few different ways that people can do that. I do work one-to-one with people, and we're going to put a link to my website, rowantree.uk.com. I work one-to-one with individuals, and I do that both in person, if we're in the local area, and we can still do that in a safe way at the moment, and also over Zoom. And you can create a real physicality, a real connection there, more so than you might think. And at the moment, I'm really excited about the community that is building around a course that I'm offering this winter. It's called Walking Through Winter. Feels like a very important offering that I'm so glad to be able to make. We are starting on Tuesday the 10th, next Tuesday. And it's a combination of online community calls, part facilitated by me and part peer support, that happen with a particular theme each time. So it would be, for example, managing energies, working with critical voice, self-kindness, working with self-judgment. We're going to have a herbal medicine specialist to come in and look at ways that we can support ourselves in that way. And then there'll be a resource that's created around that encourages people to go out all throughout winter and to explore that on a deeper level, and within whatever space and capacity they want to. And what I love about it is that we're going to go all the way through to March the 23rd. So we're going to tip over into spring at the equinox. We're going to move through this winter together. I've got some amazing... It is for people who identify as female. Some of the work I do is for everybody. That's a whole other conversation. And God, just got some bloody amazing women who are on it. It's an absolute privilege. So we'll put a link to that as well. So rowantree.uk.com/walking-through-winter.
Lovely. That's great. Well, we'll include a link to that as well. So that's absolutely wonderful. So yeah, for that, we'll include a link specifically to that, and for anything else, check out the whole website. It's really great. So yeah, thank you very much, Rowena. Really appreciate I very much enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you did, and I hope you in the audience did as well. And I hope it's kind of raised some more thoughts, and maybe it has, maybe it's some follow-on stuff. I think once we're off camera, there's probably a conversation about the next thing with that, because that's opened up loads of interesting things for me as well. So if that's the case for you in the audience, then please do, have it with us, talk to us, get in touch with us through comments, anything you like. But equally do it around you as well, and with the people you care about. Share how you feel about this to you and the people that matter to you, because this is how we do this work. This is how we all shift this stuff. We're, as part of the, we are a community, we are a collective ecosystem, and it's building those connections and sharing this stuff that really moves this forward and moves things, makes it better for us as individuals, and equally for everyone collectively at the same time. So yeah, please do share this out and continue this conversation with the people around you and with us as well. So I very much hope you enjoyed this, and that you'll tune into the next episode. The next episode is on Thursday, the 12th of November, similarly at 1 p.m. UK time. And the assumption that we're going to be looking at then is that new business is the best way to grow. We are in a kind of slightly more practical space, it sounds like, but I think we're going to be touching on some very big topics in this one too. So I hope you're not, don't feel that it's all going to be practical, because that's not what this series is about. So we're going to be exploring that one too. So please do join us for that. I hope to see you next week, and thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Rowena, for being such an exciting guest and having such a wonderful exploration with me. And thank you, and goodbye.